Welcome, folks. Welcome to the 30th episode of the ASPEC podcast. My name is Tai Wai, PhD student by day and ACE advocate, host of the ASPEC podcast by night. I'm looking forward to chatting with Bumblin Busby, very good friend and fellow content creator. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah. My name is Busby, obviously. I am a variety streamer. I do Overwatch, various indie games, mostly cozy, sometimes not. And I do co-working and art. I use they them pronouns. I'm non-binary, ace, and biromantic, and I'm a pretty loud advocate for lots of different things, not least of which is the queer community and the ASPEC community.
Heck yeah, we like our advocates in this chat here. Definitely important. Very, very important. We don't get enough representation as it is, and with the world on fire, to say the least, more needs to be done.
Yeah, absolutely.
So welcome, everyone. Glad you could make it today. Both of us are hanging in there on a few brain cells today, so bear with us if we struggle today. It's been very, very, very busy for both of us. I was proctoring exams this morning, and then I had an event this afternoon. Jumped on the computer, ran a script, and then got ready for the podcast. So it's just been go, go, go this entire day so far.
Just a couple of busy gays.
Yeah, exactly. I know it's been very busy for you as well. So, first question, I know you've talked about it, back on the back early on, and I think was it the second episode? No, third episode of the podcast. You talked a little bit about your journey, but let's just remind us a little bit. Often ASPEC identities can be difficult to pinpoint for many folks, owing to the fact that it can often be difficult to recognize a lack of attraction without context. Many ace folks, many arrow folks often mistake aesthetic attraction and other kinds of attraction for the so-called sexual attraction. How easy was it for you to come to realize your identity? You comment on that a little bit.
Yeah, you pretty much hit the nail on the head there, where, like, I feel like especially as an artist, I am someone who puts, like, a decent amount of stock into, like, the amount of, like, aesthetic attraction that I experience, and it was incredibly difficult to differentiate, like, aesthetic attraction between, like, sexual attraction. I thought that aesthetic attraction was what everybody else was experiencing, and I really didn't understand the difference until I was 19, 20-ish, and I was actually faced with sexual situations where I realized, like, oh, this is actually not for me. I kind of already had like asexuality as a vague idea in my head because of Tumblr. Like, I would have never figured out that I was any form of queer whatsoever without Tumblr, which is kind of funny because it kind of gets a bad rap of being like a, super hyper uh uh hyper discourse prone kind of toxic place when it comes to queer community stuff, but like I would have been a completely different person overall without it, and I certainly would have like never have known that I was ace. So yeah, it was really, really difficult um for me to figure out that I was ace until I was like um my first real relationship that I had. Like I had a couple like little like cute crush relationships or whatever when I was like really young. But 19 or 20 I had my first real relationship, and my boyfriend at the time was very much like a very sexual person, and I just could not make that connection whatsoever. Like I just didn't fucking get it. Um I he was always very much like, let's do this thing or that thing or the other thing, and I'm like, but why? Like I literally do not care. Like what is the point? This seems like a complete waste of time. And it actually got to the point where it ended that relationship because of that like severe difference between like his like uh sexual needs, I guess, and like my being like, well, I don't give a shit. And then after that I kind of was like, okay, so clearly there is like some sort of like vast huge difference here. So I started kind of looking more into asexuality and the ace community and kind of learning a bit more about like different identities and stuff like that within it, and kind of going, oh, okay, so yeah, this is who I am. But I didn't figure it out until I was like at least like 19 or 20 or whatever. It took so long.
That is such a common experience, and I think, you really, hit the nail on the head with the fact that many of us don't learn until we get into a relationship and they're like, whoa, holy shit, this is not what I signed up for here. And then retrospectively you're like, maybe something's
Yeah.
going on here. I know that's the case. That was very much the case for me. So you mentioned Tumblr, Ace Tumblr, as a resource that was helpful for you to come to better understand your identity. Was there anything else that was helpful in your journey to figuring out your ace identity?
Oddly enough, Twitch actually. Um, like not just helping me figure out like specifically like ace stuff, but just ace spec stuff in general. Like literally um being on your podcast and stuff like that and going uh and like listening to it, and especially like listening to experiences from like aromantic people and stuff like that, and just going, interesting, I may have some questions. But like finding a surprisingly, like to me, surprisingly large like a spec community on Twitch has been a really, really good opportunity for growth for me in like expanding my understanding of different aspec identities. Like I kind of already had like the like base set knowledge, but being able to be exposed to so many people's like real lived experiences has definitely deepened my understanding of aspec identities like by quite a bit. Like for outside of you and the podcast, like for example, like Quartzy, Cosmic Quartz or whatever, being like demisexual and listening to Faye describe their experiences with demisexuality and stuff like that, like I understood demisexuality like on a like theoretical basis basically, but like listening to someone actually explain it from their own personal standpoint, like in depth or whatever, kind of made it click like a lot more for me. Just as
Absolutely.
an example.
Definitely. And, coming to meet so many folks through the Ace and Arrow raid train last summer was so incredibly wonderful as well. I wouldn't
Yeah.
have met you, I wouldn't have met Quartzy, I wouldn't have met so many other folks if it weren't for that one fateful raid train that Shania put together last summer that really is a huge reason why we are sitting here today talking about this. If it wasn't for that, I don't think this podcast would have ever taken off. And it definitely wouldn't be where it is today if it weren't for that one raid train.
I feel like it's easy to, especially for like it kind of goes into like aspec stuff, aspec people are very invisible and stuff like that, but I feel like it's really easy to kind of not know how big the community actually is until like that one person kind of like takes that first step, and then this whole entire world like opens up and you're like, holy crap.
Yeah, absolutely. And the question I ask half jokingly and also half not jokingly is, how do you actually find an ace in the wild otherwise? Because it's not easy. Unless there's,
I mean, you've got
these...
like the black ring and everything like that, but that's such like that's a
Not
very
everybody
like
wears them.
niche knowledge, and not
Exactly.
everybody wears them. Yeah.
So it can be really difficult if you don't, you know, have, an ace ring or like a pride flag or a pin to really come and find that aspec community if it wasn't for, events like this. I know I'm incredibly lucky where I am, being able to run this, support group locally and have connections, further abroad with Ace and Arrow groups all across the country. But that's not the case for a lot of people. I recognize
Yeah.
how lucky I am. As I talk to so many folks, and they're like, there's nothing like that around me. How do you actually find community? And it can be very hard. If it wasn't for these online spaces.
Yeah. Like I'm considered to live rurally, and the closest Ace and Arrow group near me is like 3-4 hours away, like on a good day
Yeah,
without traffic.
exactly. Absolutely. Whereas I can hop on the LRT and be at the space in 20 minutes. So it's a very
Yeah.
different situation for me. On that note, Julia Sandra Decker coins the term invisible orientation for asexuality in 2014. I would also argue that, many aspects of aromanticism face similar challenges because erasure of asexuality, of aromanticism, is so inherently common across the board, both from outside the community, inside the queer community, and then unfortunately within the aspec community itself.
Especially recently, cough cough.
Yes. So angering to see those posts lately. It's the last thing that we need as a community to be doing when the entire world just wants us gone. Why should we as a community be gatekeeping each other? Then we've also got issues around, and I've talked about this many times, really poor and limited media representation. So how do you come to find your representation? How do you come to find community when all of this is going on? And how has this invisibility and erasure impacted your journey?
I'd say it makes it a lot more difficult for people to understand like what asexuality and aromanticism is, like, despite attempts to explain it to them like 1,001 times, because they saw this thing or that thing on TV that was not actually accurate. Like, for example, there was an episode of House where he ended up having a patient who was asexual, and like throughout the episode, it's basically just him kind of shitting on this person and stuff like that. And at the end, it turns out that the person was asexual because they had some sort of like medical illness that was curable. So they were cured of their asexuality. And that I feel like has affected a lot of people's perception of asexuality, where they feel like it's something that's like medicalized, like, oh, you're just depressed or you're anxious, or you've got something that's causing you to have like a low libido or whatever. And don't get me started on the difference between sexual attraction and libido, but
Exactly.
but it's really horrible. Or like people think that like a lot of like aromantic people are like, like these like unfeeling people or whatever, like Dexter from the titular TV show. Like, not that there is inherently something wrong with being like or having sociopathic tendencies or whatever, because we ain't about to start practicing sanism over here. But the fact that people like take that and use it as like an insult towards aromantic people, like, you don't have any empathy, you don't have any emotions, you're just cold, like stuff like that, is because of these portrayals. Or like Data from Star Trek or whatever, where he's just literally a robot, and that is the portrayal of someone that's not interested in like a sex or typical romance or whatever. Like, there were a couple of episodes where I think he was like starting to feel feelings and like getting interested in some other like lady robot or whatever, but it was just so clumsy and like kind of horrific. And there's only like a couple of shows that actually do like a spec representation well, and all of the others that try are just kind of actively harming the perception of aspec identities, because it's just, oh, we're just all cold and unfeeling, or like we've got a fucking medical issue.
Yeah, it's unfortunate how many physicians pathologize asexuality, even today, after it was, obviously for many, many years, asexuality was listed as I hate to say this, but it was listed as a, pathologized condition in the DSM Diagnostic and Statistical Manual under basically mental health. And in
Yeah.
DSM-5, they finally updated the wording around basically, what is it? I can't remember, but basically, it's like hyposexual something disorder, and they said if that person doesn't experience, sexual desires because of asexuality, then it's not an issue. But the fact that it's still listed that way in the DSM-5 is still problematic. We've got a long ways to go to remove asexuality as a, so-called mental disorder, which is what it's been treated as for years in the medical community. It's better than it was. Like now you can say, hey, if the person, is, doesn't experience sexual desire because of their lifelong lived experience with asexuality, then, don't diagnose it. But the fact that it's still described in that way in the DSM tells us we've got a long way to go. And it leads to doctors, unfortunately, writing in my medical records that, I have basically that condition when I told them I'm ace. So that stuff happens all the time still. And we got into...
And they're like, nope, we know better.
Exactly. And, we talked a lot about the pathologization of asexuality with Sarah Koskariff in, I believe, episode 13 on the Aces in STEM episode. So if you want to learn more about just how horribly the medical community pathologizes asexuality, I recommend tuning into that episode on the YouTube VODs. But yeah, media representation is absolutely horrible. And, Sharonda J. Brown talks about the fact that the early, representations of asexuality were basically treating aces as villains. Because how could somebody not have sexual attraction and still be human is essentially what they were trying to, the link they were trying to make. And it's such messed up, so problematic, and has led to all these misconceptions as a result. And then you get the robots. Like I know that many people recently have talked about, I think, is it Murder Mystery Bot as ace representation? But again, it's a robot. Why are you treating robots? Why are you saying that's good ace representation? We need to move away from the robotic ace representation. What we need to see is characters who are ace, but there's a lot more to them, and they're not robots. Asexuality happens to be part of their identity, but it's not the only part of their identity. They're not treated as token. They're not treated as one-dimensional, like many, many characters are. And we need to move away from all aces being sex-repulsed aces in TV shows. Because asexuality is a spectrum.
Another big one.
Asexuality is a spectrum. Not all aces are sex repulsed. There are many sex favorable aces for a variety of reasons, and something that unfortunately happens because of that representation is erasure of demisexuality, which happens far, far too often. So media plays a big role in this erasure. And it not only is a reflection of what society thinks about or, misunderstands about asexuality, but it also leads to a furthering of that narrative. So it's almost a feedback loop that continues to happen because of the poor ace representation that we're seeing.
Also, can we please get some actual fucking QPRs on TV? For the love
Yes.
of God.
Yes, absolutely. Nobody
I've not seen one.
We were actually talking about this recently. I was talking about this with somebody recently, but I can't remember the show that they mentioned. But they said there was a show that they at least interpreted the relationship as a QPR, but it wasn't explicitly called that. Like, come on, let's explicitly talk about these other kinds of relationships, talk about QPRs explicitly in TV shows, and call them that. Because most people outside the ASPEC community have never heard the term, and it means that these kinds of relationships are not accepted, not seen as valid because it's not, talked about in mainstream media.
Yeah.
But I need to ask the person I was talking with what TV show it was, because they said that they interpreted that relationship as a QPR, but unfortunately it wasn't explicitly mentioned or it wasn't explicitly discussed. It was just that's how they interpreted the relationship.
Yeah. There is one show. It's a Japanese drama. I'm probably not gonna actually pronounce this right. But it's Koisenu Futari. And it's actually about a couple that are I believe both aromantic and asexual, and they end up getting into like a relationship together just to kind of like get like societal pressure off of them because of it. But it only got one season, a total of 8 episodes. Before I'm not sure if it got canceled or what, or just like not renewed, but it was released in 2022. And that's like the only thing that I can think of, and it's not like it's a Japanese show, so obviously it's not going to be like mainstream in like white Western society. So
Yeah, and also, I believe that, the term QPR is a very Western term as well. I don't see it used in that context outside of, Western society. So maybe, that term is, there is no equivalent term in the show as a result.
yeah. But it does end up being like kind of exactly what that is.
Yeah, and
Just
that's
without
perfect.
explicitly saying it.
Yeah, and I mean, that can also be very helpful, absolutely. Not every TV show has to say, oh yeah, this character is ace because I said they were. But then again, I understand why those TV shows do, because most people aren't going to necessarily, the general public may not necessarily understand what this orientation is without them explicitly saying asexuality, unfortunately. And this gets into why I've yet to see demisexuality represented, because that would be, I think, even more difficult for a general audience to interpret. Some of the the gray aspects of asexuality, and people, the way that that would make it interpreted in society. I've often struggled to come up with a good way to represent demisexuality that is actually going to gain traction in mainstream media and have people understand it outside the aspec community. But then again, we don't necessarily always have to rely on mainstream media as aspec folks. We can create our own media. And sometimes that's where the best representation obviously comes from. Can you think of any non-mainstream media, whether it be TV, movies, books, that you feel did a particularly good job at representing aspec identity?
Do video games count?
Yeah, absolutely. Anything.
Let me find it real fast. I literally just linked it in one of the Discords I'm in a couple days ago. It is what's the name of the website where people itch.io. So I actually saw it on someone's stream for like a Pride event stream that they did, and it's called Romace. Like it's I
Hell
think I
yeah.
can actually link it in chat since I'm a mod.
Yeah, you should be able to. Exactly.
But it's called Romace, and it's like romance, but with like the in crossed out, so it ends up being Romace.
That's
And
great. I love it.
It's about sorry, my brain just left the building. A Filipino protagonist. Oh my gosh, I can speak, I swear. Navigating the development of her relationships and also societal expectations around being asexual and the difficulties that come with all of that. But I was watching this person play that game. It's like a visual novel. And it just seemed to like hit the nail on the head like perfectly about like societal expectations and kind of navigating that type of stuff and everything like that.
Heck yeah, I definitely want to check this out. That sounds amazing. Also love the fact that they cross out the N in white and make it white, because that's the aloe color. In the ace flag,
Yeah.
the white refers to aloe sexuality. So, or in this case, I'm guessing, well, because it's the ace colors, yeah, it would be aloe sexuality. So that's a very, very neat, I guess,
clever little play.
yeah, clever little play they had there. I definitely want to check this out for sure. It reminds me a little bit about the folks with a rom-com did with the TV, with that series, that short series. A rom-com versus a rom-com as a romantic. That actually debuted on the 22nd. So they just had their debut of that short film So that was
Oh,
the
I'll have
film
to
we
check it
talked
out.
about. That was the film we talked about on episode 14. I interviewed the director and producer, and we had a really enlightening chat about how things were going with, because they had just wrapped up filming at that point, and it was just released. They had their debut release. So once I come to find out when it will appear on YouTube, I will let everybody know. Do you need
Yes,
to
I'd
take a
love
break?
to like share it. Oh no, I've I just get like spam calls on my phone, so I was just silencing it.
Okay, perfect.
But no, I would love to share that around as well. I shared the game around or whatever because I try to find because like you were saying, I guess if like mainstream media isn't really going to do a good job portraying A-spec people, one of the best ways to counteract that is to do it ourselves and to make sure that those pieces of media actually get eyes on them. So I try to share stuff around as much as I can.
Absolutely. Fantastic way for sure. So yeah, I'll drop the link for a rom-com as well in the chat. So this is the link. This is the link tree for a rom-com film. They just had their premiere on the 22nd, and I'll see if I can reach out to them to see if they're still planning on putting it on YouTube. Because I know at one point they talked about releasing it on YouTube at some point, but I don't know when that's going to be.
Yeah, I will watch it in a heartbeat if they do.
Absolutely, yeah. The last update they had on YouTube was 9 months ago. So I'll keep folks posted once I find out more. They have an Instagram, and that's usually where they're updating things, I think.
I'll follow that.
Yeah, it was they chatting with Catherine and Katrina was great. They were both really really lovely to chat with. So very much looking forward to
Yeah,
seeing the film.
you've been getting quite a lot of people on your podcast, which is amazing.
Yeah, it's been absolutely amazing the folks I've been able to reach, and I'm so incredibly glad to be able to talk about, the Black and Indigenous racialized kind of Ace and Arrow experiences as well. Getting more of that representation lately too,
Very crucial.
because that representation, if we want to start, if we want to talk about overall Ace representation being lacking, talk about Black, Indigenous, and racialized representations of asexuality. That is absolutely abysmal. How do you come to understand your own identity if there's literally nothing out there in terms of representation? I mean, we're absolutely grateful for folks like Yasmin Benoit and Yaguro Lichi, but there's just not much at all in the way of ace representation for Black, Indigenous, and racialized folks. Ace spaces are
Especially not
no,
in mainstream media.
no. Ace spaces are so incredibly white overall. The space that I run is almost always white, unfortunately. And I mean, the fact that I'm white definitely plays a role, but it's just generally across the board. Ace spaces are inherently white. And so finding those spaces that are safe to have those discussions can be really difficult as a result. How are you doing at this point? You want to keep going? Do you need to take a break?
I'm doing good. I'm good to keep going if you
Yeah,
are.
absolutely. So we've talked about media representation. We've talked about erasure. Talked about, some of the most frustrating misconceptions around asexuality and romanticism. Next up, metanormativity and allonormativity. So to remind folks of those terms, allonormativity is the assumption that everybody is allosexual. They experience sexual attraction, and a related assumption is that everybody desires to be in a sexual relationship. And then we have amatonormativity, a term coined by Elizabeth Brake in 2011. And this is the assumption that everybody desires to be in a coupled, romantic, monogamous relationship. And those two things together create all sorts of problems for the aspec community, because we're told from the time that we're little kids that we're going to grow up, we're going to get married, we're going to have kids, and that's just the way it is. And there's nothing else out there. There's no other alternative, kinds of relationships that are accepted by society more broadly. And so amatonormativity and allonormativity can be so problematic for ace and aro folks. So building on these themes of allonormativity and amatonormativity, how has your lived experience influenced the relationships that you've been in? And then turning this around, and I know you talked about this a little bit earlier, what have you come to learn about your identity from being in relationships?
Well, definitely, like I said, I'd say for sure, like from being in relationships, like I said earlier, that's how I learned that I was like asexual at all, is being in a relationship, kind of uh being faced with a sexual situation, and going, oh my god, wait, this is not like this ain't me. I don't think I would have ever have like learned that I was experiencing anything differently than anybody else if I had never gotten into a relationship in the first place. I've also learned a lot about like my romantic preferences, that I used to think that I was like a super like naturally like romantic person or whatever, but I'm actually not. And I'm sure that like me being autistic plays a part in that, where, I'm not big on a lot of like the typical things you would expect out of a like white Western romantic relationship, where like, I absolutely need to have like my alone time, and I don't have like endless bounds of patience and stuff like that, and I'm very much a like very independent, like self-contained person, um where I I feel a very strong sense of like independence and individuality, where I have to have like my own voice, whereas a lot of the times in traditional romantic relationships, people will end up kind of just like morphing together a little bit in my experience, where they kind of like, oh, well, we have to have like the same opinions, we have to have the same belief systems, we have to have, you know, the same tastes in decor and everything like that. We have to have all the same friends, and like if you have like friends of your own, then they're like, you know, obviously not important. uh the only thing that matters is the person that you're in a relationship with, and like that just isn't my experience as a person. Like um I actively encourage my spouse to go out and spend time with people because it gives me like space to recharge my social battery, because like once again, I'm assuming this is autism playing a part in it, but like most people, they're in a relationship, a romantic relationship, traditional, like it doesn't take like social battery for them to like interact with like their spouse or their significant other or whatever, but for me it does. So having that alone time is like extremely important. And that's just not something that people in traditional like romantic relationships really do. They become like inseparable. Like a lot of people end up being like almost codependent essentially. And I'm just like, I literally can go for like weeks without going on a date or whatever with my significant other. Like I'm good, I'm great. um but in terms of like uh when it comes to expectations placed on me in my relationship from like amatonormative and allonormative like expectations, um a big one, a huge one, is that I'm gonna have kids. Like, and no thank you. Like, I can't even like exist as a person on a day-to-day basis without like on my own, without getting incredibly overstimulated and like having a like meltdown on an at least weekly, if not like multiple weekly basis. Like, how am I supposed to deal with this tiny screaming being that doesn't sleep when I need to sleep? Like, how am I supposed to do that? Like,
So
I
real.
cannot take care of myself, let alone an entire teeny tiny little helpless human. But like everybody is like, "Oh, you're going to have kids. When are you going to have kids? Are you going to have kids yet? Do you want kids? You should want kids. Like this is what you should want." And it's like, "No. I will literally spontaneously combust if I have to deal with a child longer than 5 fucking minutes."
So real about that. It is so incredibly frustrating that that is the default question people ask you every time you go to a gathering. It's like, when are you getting, in a relationship? When are you having kids? And you're just like, never. And they look at you like, what is wrong with you? And it's so frustrating.
Or you'll change your mind.
Yes, you're also told, you just haven't found the right person yet. And I'm like, that is not the case. It has been 38 years, and I don't give a fuck now. What's going to make me give a fuck tomorrow?
That's such a good way of putting it. Oh my god.
But yeah, you bring up a very good point about, so many folks, in society devaluing platonic relationships once they get into a traditional romantic and sexual relationship. And while that may work for some folks, I don't believe that everyone can get all the needs out of a relationship from one person alone. I think that's very difficult to do in reality. So we need to have multiple folks in our life to provide different aspects of, what we're looking for. Those platonic relationships for me are so incredibly important. And I know that as an A-spec person, seeing all my, friends I had in early university getting into relationships, I never see them anymore. If I talk to them, it's maybe once a year because they're so busy with kids and their own, families. And you're just like, what happened? Why did I lose all these folks? But this is why I personally really agree with many aspects of relationship anarchy. I know it doesn't work for everyone, and I'm not saying it should, but I know many folks in the A-spec community can relate to many aspects of relationship anarchy. Are you familiar with the term?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yep. I've watched enough of your podcasts that
Yeah.
I am.
So if you want to find out more about it for folks in the chat, basically it's a anti-hierarchical relationship philosophy which actively rejects societal assumptions around relationships and says you decide what the relationship is, not society, you decide. And it's really one of the big aspects of it is being not just communicative, but meaningfully communicative, purposefully communicative with the folks in those relationships in your life about what it is that you're looking for from that relationship. It also says that no one relationship is more important than any other relationship because they all bring unique aspects to your life. And that really speaks to me as somebody who's Aero A-spec because that's my lived experience. I find great joy from hosting the Ace and Arrow support group. I find great joy by going to Toronto and hanging out with the Toronto Aces and Arrows. I need to, navigate these different communities in order to find, the balance that I'm looking for in life. And so something like relationship anarchy really speaks to me because there is no one relationship in my life, that is more important than another one. They all bring their own unique aspects to what I'm looking for. And I know so many folks in the A-spec community as a result who also abide by relationship anarchy and also in some cases are also polyam. Those two things are not the same, but there's a lot of overlap between the two. Many polyamorous folks are also relationship anarchists. So we do have an ad break coming up here in about just under 3 minutes. Do you want to talk about Ace and Arrow Pride, or do you want to? Do you have anything else that you want to add around allonormativity and amatonormativity?
Um, hmm. That's a good question. I would say that um sorry, my brain is just
That is real. You're so
it
real.
died a little bit. Um I would say that when it comes to like you were talking about with with the issues trying to fulfill all of your like relationship needs um from one person, and then just kind of like forgetting about your friends and stuff like that. um I feel like it not only is like shitty to your friends, but also can lead to really unhealthy relationship dynamics as well. If
So
you're
real.
relying just on like one single person for like all of your emotional needs and everything like that, it can lead to a very unhealthy dynamic where you end up, like I was kind of talking about a little bit earlier, kind of getting like codependent and stuff like that, where, uh, you know, your mood ends up being based off of the mood of your like partner or partners, because like polyamorous people can definitely be guilty of that type of relationship structure as well. And if your partner is not what do you call it, is not like perfectly infallible, which just isn't realistic because everybody's human. Uh Nobody's a mind reader. There's going to be miscommunications, there's going to be shit happens, you know. If they are not infallible and perfect as a human being, which is impossible, if you're relying on them for every single emotional need in your life, you're going to get screwed entirely, and it's going to end up being this absolutely horrible toxic situation. So it's incredibly important not to fall into those relationship structures. Even if you don't follow like relationship anarchy to a T or whatever, even if you do consider yourself part of a traditional like romantic relationship, like don't fall for the idea that you have to throw all of your other relationships away for the sake of the romantic relationship that you're in. You are going to end up getting burnt because of it.
Absolutely. And I argue that while not everybody obviously is a relationship anarchist, I think that taking aspects of the framework around communication and just challenging what you typically think of as the bounds of a relationship can be really helpful and really healthy for folks to do, irregardless of what kind of relationship they're in. Just thinking about that a little bit, I think everybody can learn something from reading, the short instructional manifesto for relationship anarchy, because I think there's something in there for everybody around communication and
Yeah,
the importance of
yes.
it.
Yeah, you took exactly what I was trying to say and actually summarized it perfectly.
Absolutely, yeah. It's I highly recommend everybody taking a look at that link there, because I learned a lot from reading it and thinking about it. So we are in an ad break currently. Wasn't able to snooze it, unfortunately, but that's the way it is. So
Gotta love ads.
yeah. Do you want to take a short little break and then come back in like 3 minutes and chat about Ace Pride?
Yeah, sure. Sounds good to me.
All right. So we'll pop over to the BRB screen and we'll be back in about 3 minutes. All right. Thanks for waiting, folks, and apologies for getting caught in the middle of the ad break there. I wasn't able to snooze it, unfortunately. It didn't give me the option this time, but we're back now, and let's chat a little bit about what A-Spec Pride means to you.
Yeah, I think a really big part of A-Spec Pride has to do, especially right now, at least until visibility and stuff like that is increased, knowledge is increased. A lot of it has to do with uh basically just refusing to feel like someone who is broken. understanding who you are, understanding you're not broken, you're not weird, you're not messed up in some way. You are a perfectly normal person. You're not cold or unfeeling or a bitch. You're just you, and you were born the way you are, and that's fine. And kind of just denying those misconceptions that are placed upon you and have plagued you of being broken. You're not broken. You can be proud of yourself as a person. You can have confidence in yourself as a person, as a whole person outside of societal expectations based off of allonormativity and amatonormativity. Like, you don't have to feel like a fuck up.
Exactly. That is so well said. And I will add, you can have meaningful relationships that are important to you as well. Don't have to listen to what society says. You find the relationships that work for you and you go from there, because that's really what it's about. It's finding, for me, it's the platonic relationships in my life that are the most important for me in many ways, because that's where I've been able to build such a wonderful community around me. While that's not going to work for many folks, it works for me, and that's really all that matters.
Yep.
So well said. Thank you so much. Anything else that you'd like to add at this point?
Yeah, actually, while we were talking about like aspec representation and stuff like that, especially of BIPOC folks, I actually thought of a person who approached me a while ago about joining a like virtual meetup and like Insta live with them, who is a I believe an Indian creator. I don't want to misspeak here, but they host a lot of lives and groups and talks and stuff like that over on Instagram. I'm pretty sure you probably know who I'm talking about because
Is it
I had
wrong.org?
sent.
Is it?
It's I'll link their page in chat.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I've spoken with an Indian creator who runs, Ritash, who's a big part of wrong.org. They are lovely. They are wonderful. I had the wonderful opportunity of appearing on their Insta Live once myself. Highly recommend chatting with them. They're great.
Yeah. But I just like it kind of hit me like after we like had moved on to like the directly after that question. I was like, wait a second, I know the perfect person to recommend for this.
Yeah, absolutely. They're wonderful. I had a lot of fun chatting with them, and I often try to tune in as much as I can to their Insta lives. They usually go live on Saturdays, really early for you, but for folks on the East Coast, they're usually going live around 10 a.m. Eastern. That would be 7 a.m. Pacific, unfortunately, which is a bit early. But 10 a.m.'s fairly reasonable. If you're on the
for
East
me
Coast.
that'd be like 7 a.m.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, too early for most folks on the West Coast, unfortunately. Definitely highly recommend checking them out. they're the channel that they actually run the episodes on is rang.org. So let me grab that Instagram link. And I believe rang means colors, if I'm not mistaken. So this is the channel where they post all the Insta lives. Talk to all sorts of different queer folks. Everybody from, aces. They just spoke with trans women last Saturday. They are also a counselor themselves, so they talk a lot about mental health as well. The importance of that in the queer community, particularly. But they've had many ace folks up here on their Insta lives.
Yeah.
Highly recommend checking them out.
Oh my gosh, I yapped so much. I'm like out of breath.
Absolutely. It's been really wonderful chatting with you again. And thank you so much for appearing on the podcast today after such a wildly busy day.
Yeah, and still gonna be busy
still
later
be
too.
Busy. Yeah, thanks for thanks for taking the time to fit this into your really busy day.
Well, yeah, especially you too as well. I was really happy to be able to get the chance to actually come on here because I was very interested in this specific series because I know I've been on the podcast before, but I feel like this kind of has a more specific like theme to it, and I was watching the previous episodes and was like, actually I have some thoughts on all of this. So I was like, let me see if I can get in there.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you so much. So the last of the Pride Talks will be happening tomorrow, and we'll be speaking with fellow Fruity Stream Team member, Kana, who I had the pleasure to meet last December in person, which was amazing. So we're going to be speaking with Kana tomorrow. And that will bring us to the end of the Pride Talks for the end of June. And then we'll be switching back to more of a regular format with a specific kind of topic and, more of a multi-panel approach. So July, we're going to be talking about kink and its intersections with the asexuality and the ace community, because there's so many misconceptions around what kink actually is and why so many aces are kinky. So that should be an interesting talk. I know Caber wants to chat about that. Hope to get a couple more folks to chat around kink in the ace community.
Yeah, I'll have to start trying to get people onto the podcast because I'm like, that one particularly would not be up my alley,
No.
but
I totally get it.
But definitely will spread around any social media posts and anything like that about it for sure, because it's definitely a very, very important topic of conversation and another really huge misconception as well that people have. So
absolutely. So yeah, that's what we're looking forward to in July. And then I think in August, I really want to explore the intersections of agender identity and aspec identity, because I was sitting there reflecting the other day and I'm like, I am 99.999% certain that every single agender person that I know is also aspec. Like the
Oh,
Venn
hey, it me.
diagrams, almost a complete circle. And I'm like, why? Why is that? And so I think that would be a really interesting topic to explore in August. So,
Well, you can sign me up for that one.
absolutely. Looking forward to, so we'll be in July moving back to more of a regular format, 1 to 2 times a month maximum. This was a ton of fun, and I know I'm going to miss it, but also running 16 podcasts in 4 weeks was a lot.
You got to be really tired.
And I am definitely feeling the fatigue now. I am actually going to take the next week off from streaming, I think, because I'm going to need it after Friday. Aw. I am so happy to hear that, little Mama Silva. I'm so glad that they were so accepting of your identity, because I know that bi folks experience so much erasure, and I feel for that, and I'm so glad that they were accepting and it went well today.
We love some accepting people, that's for sure.
Absolutely. We love to see it, and we need more of those folks in our life. I know that somebody said something that really struck a chord with me. It's not so much as you coming out to folks, but it's you letting those people in on your identity. And it was like, hell yeah, I love that way of looking at it.
Yeah, it's like being more vulnerable with them and like opening up instead of like, yeah. I like that take on it, because that's definitely like what it feels like for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much again for hanging out with us today, chatting about asexuality, a little bit about aromanticism as well. And let's go on a raid.